Hello everybody! Today I'm going to install a MikroTik RouterOS CHR or Cloud Host Router version on an Azure VM. This is Stef from Samayas and welcome to my channel. So for those of you who don't know MikroTik, it's a relatively quote-unquote small Latvian company based in Riga. Well, small versus the Ciscos of the world, of course. They started somewhere in 1995. So what do? They make networking hardware from access point to switches to routers. You have a small map access point like this, which unfortunately doesn't have a Wi-Fi 6 version yet. Or you have the bigger router Chateau, which is a 5G Wi-Fi 6 router in multiple versions. Or you have the more advanced but older tile-based cloud core routers like this, which are full enterprise-based router firewalls. On the software side of things, they mainly have two OSs. First, you have the RouterOS and then you have the SwitchOS. Only a small number of devices run SwitchOS, and some devices can switch between both, but the majority is running RouterOS. The SwitchOS is a light version without all the bells and whistles, if your device really only just needs switching functionality. Personally, I haven't run SwitchOS on any of their devices, and this is mainly because it's only running in web and the configuration is different from RouterOS. The nice thing about working with MikroTik devices is that whether you have a small map or you have a large enterprise firewall, there's only one OS with all the functionality. Compared to Cisco, where entry-level devices are running on different OSs, this is quite nice. The second thing, which is great, is that almost everything is scriptable. And if somehow you need to access or tweak some things, you might just be able to do that through scripting. And finally, after all those years, MikroTik is still behaving like a small startup, with frequent hardware and OS releases all the time, with errors and fixes. But hey, nobody's perfect. I've been using MikroTik for the last 15 years on a number of different projects at different clients, and I've never had a device that became obsolete because of its software, which happened on loads of other devices. Each of those old devices were easily able to migrate from RouterOS 6 to RouterOS 7 with all functionality still working. Of course, devices become obsolete because of network speed or Wi-Fi speed, but that's another discussion. To manage MikroTik devices, you basically have four tools. You either have the web-based access or the CLI mode through SSH or Telnet, or you have the access through the FAT client or through the API. These days, the latest version of the FAT client also runs on Linux and Mac, but is still in beta, even though the previous version was runnable on Linux through Vine. The FAT client is quite handy and also allows for CLI access. If you want to automate things between different devices, CLI or the API are the way to go. If you go dig around the internet or in their forum, there's a quite active user base of passionate people around it, and there are quite some YouTube videos on the different devices available. I switched to MikroTik devices roughly 15 years ago, when I was still using pfSense firewalls, where I was quite happy with until I wasn't anymore. The main reason at that time to switch to MikroTik versus any other firewall was because I needed to set up a site-to-site VPN on IPsec with dynamic IP address, and MikroTik gracefully allowed me to fix that through scripting and custom development, which other vendors didn't allow for. But since they're mainly making hardware, and even I have some hardware devices, but then why would I virtualize their OS rather than play around with the hardware? Well, of course, I do play around with their hardware a lot, and in the future I sure will make some dedicated videos about some of their hardware. However, I'm just a small fish in a pond of fishes. For my servers, I can simulate a staging environment as I've done before with all the hardware. However, on the network side of things, I only have one network, which is my quote-unquote production network, and I also have only one internet connection. So I don't have a spare network connection laying around. And that's probably the same for a lot of the YouTubers out there. And so, what has been bothering me for a while now on some of those videos, and I totally get it, why they don't go any further, is that when somebody explains a feature like NAT or VPN or something else, they just limit themselves to that feature, and they don't present the whole picture. And they use either local hardware or they use VMs without going in all the way. At some point, I even thought and tried to use my Chateau as an isolated device, since it can connect to the internet to 5G. But as far as I can tell, the only country in Europe where you can have public and fixed IP addresses on a SIM card is Netherlands. All the other countries for 4 and 5G access use carrier grade NAT, and so you can't use a Chateau for demo purposes. An alternative would be to back up my production firewall, erase all configuration just to do video, and afterwards restore everything. But that doesn't make my family quite happy, so I discarded that. So then finally, I came up with a plan to try to virtualize RouterOS through CHR on a VM on the internet. Since my background is in Microsoft and .NET, well, I chose Azure, but I'm sure you can do it in other clouds as well. So this is the start of a series of videos about MikroTik and VPN and other features, where I'll be using this VM to demonstrate the whole chain of things, but not just locally, but going through the internet with clients connecting to it. And in this video, I'll take you through all the steps needed to set up a VM environment, needed to have a working CHR. A minor tweak will be that I'll be using Azure Firewall in front to secure this firewall, since it's just basic setup of a CHR and everything is open out of the box. So in order to install a MikroTik CHR in Azure, the first thing I need to do is download the software. So we go to the MikroTik site, we go to Software, and then we scroll down. And at the bottom we have Cloud Hosted Router. However, the Azure VM requires a VHD image, and MikroTik only has a VHDX image. So first we'll download it and then we'll transform it. Then after having downloaded it, I unzipped it. So now in order to convert my MikroTik VHDX image, which I downloaded and unzipped, I now switch to PowerShell. Now I'm going to use the PowerShell command convert VHD, where I first specify the path of my original VHDX image, and then as a destination path I choose the fixed-VHD. And at the end I specify that I want a VHD type fixed. And that might take a while. And now I have my converted fixed VHD image. So now we can continue. Now the first thing I need to do in my PowerShell is to log in into Azure. I use AZ Login and it will prompt me for my username and password. It asks me onto which subscription I want to work, and then I'm logged in. Now we create an Azure resource group. Under that resource group we will store all the items which are needed for the Azure VM. I'm back in my PowerShell, and for simplicity I'll call the resource group MikroTik and the location Western Europe. And just like that, my resource group is created. If we switch back to our browser, we can now clearly see that the resource group has been created. So now we can finally start to do the real work. So now we have our VHD image and we need to somehow magically upload that to the cloud. So how do we do that? Well, we create a temporary storage account onto which we'll upload it, and afterward we'll convert it to a disk. So to create a storage account, I call easy storage account create with the name, the resource group, the location, standard SKU, my kind, which is storage v2. I don't allow public access, minimum TLS is 1.2, HTTP only, and secure transfer. And now let's see what happens. And it's creating my storage account. That takes some time. And my storage account is created. So now in order to access that storage account, I need to retrieve my storage keys. And so I'll call AZ storage account list keys on the account Samayas MikroTik CHR, and it will retrieve my primary and my secondary key to access. By default, when retrieving keys, we always have a primary key and a backup key. We need to copy one of those key values into the next command. Next, inside our storage account, we need to create a container to store our files. So we'll do that using AZ storage. and this created a container inside our storage account. We create a container which is called VHDX, and now finally we'll upload our local fixed VHD image to our storage account. So now we call AZ storage blob, where we upload, we specify the account name, we specify the account key which we previously retrieved, we specify the container name, we specify the local file name and the file name on the server. Now let's run that. And our file has been uploaded into our container. If now inside our resource group I do a refresh, as you can see, I have my storage account. If I go into my storage account and I go to storage browser, I go to blob containers, I have my VHDX container, and there I have my VHD image. And now I'm all set to create my virtual disk. Now we're going to create a virtual disk based on the storage account where we already uploaded our VHD. And for that we use AZ disk. We specify again the resource group. We specify our disk name, Samayas CHR managed disk. We specify the source of where the file is located. And our blob storage was called Samayas MikroTik CHR.blob.core.windows.net. It was located under VHDX. And it was called CHR 7.19.3.VHD. And we want a disk of type Linux. So our disk has been created. Now we can switch back to web and have a look. Now in our resource group, let's refresh. And we have our managed disk. Next we'll start creating the networking side of things. First, we're going to create a VNet, and the first VNet will be a /16, which is a subnet private domain, and I've chosen 10.42.0.0. Underneath that, I create two subnets, a public subnet in a 10.42.0.0/24 and in a 10.42.1.0/24 for the LAN. Now I do know that a real MikroTik has much more potential, but two subnets for now is sufficient. Once we have the two subnets, we'll create a public IP, and then finally, the sauce that glues everything together is the NICs. First, we'll create a public NIC, which is assigned to the public subnet and which receives a public IP address, and then the second NIC is assigned to the private VNet and does not receive a public IP address. And so when traffic hits the public IP, Azure will automatically forward it to the public IP NIC. And since the NIC is part of a subnet 10.42.0.0/24 and has an attached VM, that VM will receive the address and or the traffic directly. The VM itself will, however, receive traffic from the private 10.42.0.something. And so that is happening somewhere. So now we'll first create the first big subnet. As you can see, we have AZ network, where we create a VNet, where the first VNet is called Samayas CHR VNet, in the resource group MikroTik, and we have a subnet name, which is Samayas CHR public subnet, which has an assigned IP address of 10.42.0.016 for the big VNet. And for the subnet for the public, we have 10.42.0.0/24, and we're still in Western Europe. Now that's created, and now we'll create the second subnet in the same VNet. So AZ network VNet, this time we only create a subnet. We're again in the resource group MikroTik. We're on the VNet Samayas CHR net, which we just created, and we create a LAN subnet in the 10.42.1/24. And our second VNet is created. Now create our public IP address. For that, AZ network, public IP, create, again in the resource group MikroTik, and we call it Samayas CHR public IP. And it's created. And now we'll create our first public NIC. So we use AZ network, create NIC in the resource group MikroTik, which we call Samayas CHR public net. We use the Samayas CHR VNet. We use a subnet, which is a CHR public subnet. We also assign the public IP address, and location is still Western Europe. and it's created. And now we create our secondary NIC. Again, AZ network, NIC create, resource group MikroTik, the name Samayas CHR LAN NIC. We use again the same VNet, Samayas CHR VNet, and this time we use a subnet, Samayas CHR LAN subnet, again in Western Europe. And it's created. And if we now go back to the web interface and we refresh, and as you can see, now we have 2 NICs, we have a public IP address, and we have a virtual network. And if we go into that virtual network, we have subnets, and here we clearly have 2 distinct subnets. Now the final step in this puzzle is creating our VM. All the rest is ready. So we create our VM using AZ VM. Again, we have resource group MikroTik. We call it Samayas CHR VM. We assign the 2 NICs, Samayas CHR public NIC and Samayas CHR LAN NIC. We attach our disk image, Samayas CHR managed disk. It's of type Linux. We choose a standard B1S, which is a small sized VM, and location is Western Europe. This might take some time. And our VM is created. So now, after having done a refresh, I can see my Samayas CHR VM. If I go in there, I can see its public IP address. I can see the private IP address it received. If I go to Serial Console, connecting takes some time. And I can see my router is working. So let's log in, username admin, no password, and I get a default license. And now it asks me for a new password. And I'm in my CHR Firewall. A quick export of configuration shows me everything. I should be receiving an IP address on Ethernet 1. Now let's see if it has an IP address. And I have an IP address of 10.42.0.4. Let's see if I can reach the internet, and I can ping. So my firewall is installed and is connected to the internet. However, if I try to ping it, I get no response whatsoever. So we still have issues. So out of the box, Azure, even though we have already created all the correct network settings for the VM, prevents internet access unless we create specific internet rules and allow specific internet traffic. So that's what we're going to do next. So first we're going to create an Azure Network Security Group. So I type AZ Network NSG create, and the name is Samayas CHR NSG. My resource group is still MikroTik and location is still Western Europe. And so now I've created my network security group. However, this is still not enough. Now I need to assign this network security group to my NIC. And we do this by using AZ Network NIC, where we assign our Samayas CHR Network Security Group to our Samayas CHR Public NIC. And then finally, for now, we will just create one rule to allow only access from my IP address. So here I have AZ Network NSG rule. In the resource group MikroTik, under the Samayas CHR NSG, I have allow my IP, priority of 100, access allow, all protocols, inbound traffic on my specified IP address, where the source and destination ranges might be anything, and a description allow all traffic from my IP. And now when I ping, I have a reply. Now if I refresh, I have my NSG group, and as you can see, my first rule allows access to my IP. And I have the web interface, and then finally my Winbox is able to connect as well. And then finally my Winbox is able to connect as well. Mission accomplished. So setting up a cloud CHR on a VM is relatively easy. If you guys enjoyed this content, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, or hit the bell sign, or leave a comment down below.